All right, so we are going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kimberly Makis. I'm a health educator at the Maxwell and Eleanor Blum Patient and Family Learning Center at Massachusetts General Hospital.
And my name is Mariam Daib. I'm also a health educator here at the Blum Center. So before we get started, I would like to go over a few things. Please note this session is being recorded for educational purposes. If you are interested in viewing this recording, it will be made available on the Blum Center website at massgeneral.org/Blum Center. You are in listen-only mode. Everyone has been muted to eliminate background noise so that we can hear the speakers. If you have a question, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. Only Blum Center staff, the co-host, and the guest speakers will see your questions. We will have time at the end of the session for them. Please do not share any personal medical information or questions in the chat. If you have a medical question, please ask your doctor. And so now I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker, Raina McMahon, and she will start her presentation.
All right, give me a minute. My computer, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, my name's Raina McMahon. I'm a recovery coach for MGH Chelsea. Thank you everybody for coming. Happy Recovery Month. I am proud to be here with my amazing team. We have put together a presentation on issues so prevalent in our work and our own personal experience, stigma and bias. I'm going to start with a little exercise on unconscious bias. In preparing for this talk, I did a little research and came across an eye-opening social experiment on unconscious bias. There were videos posted of this experiment, and not just one, but many videos across different countries and different cultures. This particular video is of a white businessman walking down the street, suit, tie, briefcase. He is walking and collapses on a busy sidewalk. People rush over to help him. The helpful side of humanity is evident in this video. A few days later in this exact same spot, a homeless man collapses in a very similar fashion. This is all caught on video. Not surprising at all, but still horrific. People look at him, but keep walking. They make an instant judgment that this man doesn't deserve help. Whether their thoughts or judgments were conscious, unconscious, or both, we don't know. We just see that people rushed to help the businessman, but no one helped the homeless man. These two men were both human and both needed help. Why did one get all the help and the other none at all? This is a drastic example, but still very relevant. When we first meet someone, our brain produces millions of judgments on a person within moments of meeting them. Whether we realize it or not, these judgments are happening and can definitely influence how we interact with this person. Culture and media definitely influence these biases. Learning to put our judgment and bias aside is difficult, but necessary. As recovery coaches, most of us do not read a person's chart before we initially meet them. Because just based on a person's chart, we can come to so many judgments based on their diagnoses. I know this likely isn't possible for anyone here in the clinical side of things, but looking at our own bias will help us be there with the person and really be helping with little judgment. It is not possible to have zero judgment or bias. It's part of what makes us human. But learning to put these aside is crucial, especially in our roles as recovery coaches. As a small demonstration, we have put together a little exercise for unconscious bias. In a minute, I will show you a slide with pictures on it. I will throw a fact that is true about one of the people on the slide. Go with your first gut instincts. You can share your guess in the chat box or keep it to yourself if you choose. At the end, I will share the facts with you and see if you guessed right. And if you guys know us and know the answer, don't cheat. So here's our 10 beautiful people right here. I'm going to share some facts. Fact number 1. Who here is a graduate of Harvard, director of education at Nashua Street Jail, and an aspiring attorney and politician? It's a lot of stuff right there. Fact number 2. Who here spent 20 years houseless? Fact number 3. Who here rides a motorcycle? Who is the biker? Fact number 4. Who here grew up in a 2-parent household? Fact number 5. Who here is going to Northeastern to become a nurse? Fact number 6. Who here was raised in a 1-parent household? Fact number 7. Who here has experienced incarceration? Fact number 8. Who here went to an Ivy League school? Fact number 9. Who is the gun owner? And fact number 10. Who put all their kids through college? I'll give you guys a few seconds to ponder your answers. All right, let's see if you guessed right. Fact number 1, who here is a graduate of Harvard, director of education at Nashua Street Jail, and an aspiring attorney and politician? Number 5, who here spent 20 years houseless? Number 9, who here rides a motorcycle? Our friend number 4. Who here grew up in a 2-parent household? Number 7. Who here is going to Northeastern to become a nurse? Number 6. Who here was raised in a 1-parent household? Number 1. Who here has experienced incarceration? Number 10. He's got a really big smile on his face for being behind bars. Who here went to an Ivy League school? Number 2. So we're left with 2 people. Out of these 2 people, who is the gun owner and who has put all their children through college? Does this surprise you? Media and culture have ingrained these ideas in our head, which sometimes live deep in our subconscious. Male people of color are gun owners. White women put their children through college. White men go to Ivy League schools. Men, not women, ride motorcycles. These ideas are changing, but we need them to change faster, and that's where all of us come in, to inspire this change within ourselves and within our world. The whole idea of this exercise is to show that we all have internal, conscious or unconscious bias and stigma. It may be on a micro level, but it is there. As recovery coaches, we are so acutely in tune with the very real human cost of stigma. Having experienced ourselves so much and witnessing this on a daily basis, we see the result of bias and stigma, especially in settings such as healthcare, which is in the business of helping people. Unfortunately, so often bias and stigma leads to unfair treatment of the person, and when the person starts to believe this, and it turns into a self-perpetuating cycle. Why reach out for help when they treat you as if you don't deserve help? A tiny bit of kindness and compassion goes a long way. As witnessed in the video I was speaking of earlier, which if we have time, I will share after our presentation. Two people fall to the ground and need help. Does the one in a suit and a tie deserve help more than the houseless man? Does the person of color deserve help less than a white person? We can give so many examples of this, but we're all human, and when we need help, we should be able to receive this help. Now I will turn it over to Dan Foley, who will share about culture, bias, and worldview. Hint, this is where a lot of our learned, conscious, and unconscious biases are formed.
Well, thank you, Raina, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. My name's Dan Foley. I am a recovery coach here at Mass General Hospital. I work in the emergency department as well as at the Nashua Street Jail. For me, coming to terms with my own biases has been an interesting process, to say the least. Figuring out how to push them aside is also an ongoing learning experience. I find that asking a lot of questions about the background and culture of the individuals that I support can not only help me push my biases aside, but it also changes the dynamic of my interactions tremendously. When someone is afforded the opportunity to educate me on their cultural background, it can be empowering for them, enlightening for me, and it paints an amazingly detailed picture as to who they are as an individual. Then, as our relationship develops, I can always take into consideration their cultural beliefs, which works not only to strengthen our bond, but also to help change my worldview altogether. Next slide, please. Worldview is the way a person perceives life to be based on the various communities and cultures in which they have lived. Worldview influences language, philosophies, beliefs, values, traditions, behaviors, and more. Worldview can direct decision-making processes. Worldview affects the way we interact with people. As I stated before, learning about an individual's culture and history can help to change my worldview. If I base my interaction solely on my life experiences, my beliefs, and my cultural upbringings, it could create a barrier between myself and the individual I'm trying to support, as well as create a narrow-minded perspective for myself. By constantly trying to learn from the people that I support, I am afforded the opportunity to learn about so many different cultures, traditions, and ways of life, which constantly changes my worldview and helps me to stay as open-minded as is possible. This, in turn, allows for me to be able to provide a higher level of support for the individuals that I'm working with. Next slide, please. Cultures can include country of origin, city, neighborhood, economic class, family, race, gender, faith, schools, sexual preference, work, friends, clubs, organizations, and so on. It's important for me to keep in mind that I will never know everything about any one particular culture, including my own. With this mindset, I am able to make sure to ask questions about the things I do not know about and never make assumptions based on what it is that I think I do know. For an individual to share these details with me is always a very powerful experience, and I am always looking to incorporate what they have taught me into what it is that they would like to work on. Being comfortable asking about different cultural things is a tricky thing to navigate. It feels very uncomfortable at first, but what I've learned through my experience is is it's okay to feel uncomfortable as long as you're doing it with good intentions and you want to get educated in regards to an individual's culture. Next slide, please. Ask questions. Have an open mind. Show true interest and a desire to understand. Be curious. Learn. Share your own culture. It might feel awkward at first asking questions about another person's culture, but I have found that it usually leads to a much stronger bond. Oftentimes, I'll use my lack of knowledge in regards to a culture I may not be familiar with to ask the questions that might seem uncomfortable at first. For example, you mentioned that you are Native American. I know what they taught me in school about Native American culture probably isn't accurate. I would much rather hear about it from you so I can get a better understanding about your culture. Would you mind telling me about what it is like growing up to being Native American? I have found that by asking somebody these types of questions is typically really well received, and it has done wonders for opening up my personal worldview. The more I can open my worldview, the less my personal cultural biases seem to be a factor during my interactions. Next slide, please. I think that a lot of us, especially now, feel as though we do not harbor any of our own biases, prejudices, or stereotypes. However, it is important that we are aware that we all have them and that we are able to push them aside and broaden our worldview. Exercises like the one that Raina was kind enough to facilitate at the beginning of this presentation really helped me to understand that these things do exist within me. However, by taking the time to allow the individuals that I support educate me on their cultures, upbringings, and about who they truly are as a person, I have been able to broaden my worldview tremendously. And I look forward to learning more every day now. It truly is a powerful, moving experience, not only for the individuals that I support, but also for myself on a personal level. Here to talk about, oh wow, it's near impossible to talk about bias without discussing stigma. So here to talk about stigma is my coworker, Alan.
Thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate it. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for coming. Truly appreciate you being here. And thank you, Raina, and thank you, moderators. Yeah, I'm here to talk about stigma. And if you could, while I'm talking, if you could, I'd like to talk about stigma, not only with our interactions with people, but something that's kind of personal to me is the importance of not stigmatizing people in the notes we take, in the charts. As Raina said at the beginning, we try not to read the charts before we meet with people, because we just want to meet the person. You know, we don't want to meet the diagnosis. If we read that stuff, then we might form, you know, she's correct, we automatically form a vision of the person we're going to meet before we meet them, talking on the phone or whatever. But if we read the chart, then it gets much more succinct, and we really try to stay away from doing that, because one of the really big things we go by is the people we work with are not their diagnosis. I am not my diagnosis. You know, I'm not a bipolar alcoholic. I'm Alan, you know? So you get to know me. So obviously, stigma can be a profound deterrent to recovery and growth. And people that we work with, people with substance use issues in particular, we get, you know, there's been a lot of stigmatization over the years. It has gotten better, but I mean, I've gotten it in jails, detoxes, shelters, doctors' offices, hospitals, methadone clinics, public transportation, Social Security office. Social Security is incredible like that. SSDI, and just on and on. We get stigmatized, or have been for a long time, and it's gotten better. But you know, this became important to me with the notes in particular, because it was a few years ago. I had share a personal story. I had some pretty major stomach issues going on, and I got a referral to go see a GI doc. And I'm a real baby, like as a patient, I'm a real baby, and I was in a lot of pain. So I was not in a good mood, and the doctor was talking to me, and we went on, and then the appointment ended with nothing happening really. So I said to him, I'm missing a lot of work here. Do you have something for the pain? And he looked at me and shook his head a little bit and said, Mr. Reba, we don't prescribe narcotics for stomach issues. And I said to him, I didn't ask for narcotics. I asked for something for the pain. Now, I know that this was the first time he saw me, so he had to go back and read my chart, which was a long history of alcohol admissions, MGH emergency room visits, long history of that. Plus, it used to be on the banner part of my chart. I just remember ETOH in big bold letters. So I came to the conclusion that how did he not hear what I was asking for there? Because he had already formed an opinion on me. And to sum up the story, he did not know that I worked here. So I went back later that afternoon to work and read the note he had written on me. And in the note, he wrote, of note, which is a phrase I hate, of note, Mr. Reba asked for narcotics for his stomach issue, and I had to tell him. So this made me look like a drug seeker. And you have to think when you write the notes about who's reading the notes. So I called him up and I had him addend it because I realized what this would make me look like. And it didn't happen. So it's really important to humanize us, humanize people in the notes, first of all, because, what these kind of things can do is just make us feel defeated. It can create low self-esteem and just make us feel like giving up sometimes. It's very frustrating. And lots of stigmatization can keep people in the house. I've seen this happen. They don't want to go outside. They get looks. They get stared at. They don't want to go for help because they're sitting in a doctor's office not looking that great. But, who knows? And there's just a lot of things going on with this. And it's so, you wouldn't believe how much it can affect us. For a while, I was working with a gentleman, and I didn't know him that well. I was just getting to know him. So we jumped on the subway, and we were taking the subway somewhere. I can't remember where. It was the Orange Line. Excuse me. And when we got on the train, he kind of huddled up in the corner and curled himself into this little ball. And I didn't know what was going on. So when we got off the train, I asked him, and he said he was homeless for 10 years, sleeping outside, homeless, and he wasn't anymore. So every time he got on the train, he got all of these looks, people walking away from him and holding their nose and such. So it was about 6 months later since and he still had this feeling in him. He still had this reaction when he got on the train and when he got into that situation. And I'm sure he was that way a lot of places. And, one of the big problems is, and this is for me, I became very comfortable in the system. I started to agree with all of this stigma, and I became comfortable. I started to believe them, and I agreed with them. And when I was laying up in a group home or in one of my many detoxes or sleeping outside, this was okay for me, it was okay. And I remember saying that to myself many times. And, it really wasn't okay. So what it did was it kept me from growing because it kept me from trying a lot of things. There was no inspiration in it. Next slide, please. Thank you. So you see up at the top there, kind and gentle, kind and gentle. That's what I say all the time, kind and gentle, kind and gentle, kind and gentle. I had one of my old bosses teach me this. And that's what that's how I try to treat people across the board. When I meet with people, I go into it with a trauma-informed care aspect. I assume that everybody I met with has had some form of trauma or stigma, and they probably have. I've yet to meet somebody who hasn't. I mean, just being in a detox is kind of a trauma for somebody, or being in jail certainly is. So what I try to do, or what we try to do, is when I meet with a person for the first time, I try not to read the chart, which is said over and over, so I can meet the person, but also kind of gentle and positive. So positive reinforcements of a person's truth. Most of the folks we work with have been beaten down by stigma for so many years that they believed it, just like I used to. So I try to point out a person's positive things, even if it's just one thing. Everybody always has something, but sometimes if somebody's struggling with themselves and beaten down, I say, hey, you did a great thing. You made it to this appointment today. That's amazing. All of the things they've been going through, and it is amazing. A lot of the time, it's amazing this person showed up at the appointment. Some of the other compliments I can get, you have great energy. You're asking for help right now. You're really brave. You're really brave. You're asking for help right now. That's hard to do. But sometimes, and I love it. Sometimes a person will come in with a smile on their face for the first time. And look at that smile, I'll compliment that. Or just, like I said, positive reinforcements of a person's truth. Or it can be as simple as nice outfit. You wear great shoes. I have a patient, we go back and forth with that stuff all the time. And this brings to mind another story where I was working with this woman at another place, and she was shooting heroin hard. She was on a long run, and she would come into our Suboxone clinic where we were, and we're sitting there talking, and I would meet with her, with the woman all day. She's like, yeah, I got fired again. And they're talking, back and forth, and it turned out it was the third job she had got fired from while she was shooting heroin, and that was probably why. But the thing to me was she got hired for 3 jobs too. I was like, how did you get hired for 3 jobs when you're off on a run like that? I can't believe you got hired, never mind you got fired, So this woman had a real strength with that, and she always did, and she's working for quite a while now. And one thing we do is we're calling it here everyday language. We call it human experience language. If you notice, we don't use any clinical terminology. We try not to, and we do that across the board in meetings, and also with the people that we're working with. And what this does is it really helps us to concentrate on a person's assets. When we say it with this human experience language, it helps people feel more comfortable with us and really removes stigma and helps to remove stigma. And with repeated, honest, positive messages. Now, this is something that we have to do a lot, because if somebody's been, these negative self-images people have of themselves are ingrained in there because they've been told these things for many years. So if we can point out a person's truth and compliment them on it, and compliment person on their positives all the time, through and through, over and over and over and over again, it helps them build up their own strengths. It helps them gain energy, confidence, and hope. And here's the thing, it will help people try things, hopefully. Because I know one of the big things I found out after I got sober and I started really working on myself was that I realized that I had a tremendous fear of success and failure. So I figured if I didn't try anything, I wouldn't succeed and I wouldn't fail. So I'll be successful. So I didn't try anything for 20 years. And as a result, I went nowhere. But when I got sober and the people started helping me, working with me with my positive sides and helping me learn to believe in those, I started trying things. And in effect, realizing that I could do a lot more than I thought I could do. And that made me move up and try more things and more things and more things. And for a guy who was unemployed, I'm the 20-year houseless guy. And I was unemployed, obviously, all that time too. And now I'm a full-time recovery coach for MGH. And a lot of this is due to the people pointing out my positives and helping me believe them too. Next slide, please. So this is stigma with our own language. And we think about that when we're talking about them amongst ourselves. And I'm glad this is something that we talk about, because I'm talking about stigma with our language amongst ourselves, with the doctors, with the other recovery coaches, with nurses, everybody. When we're in clinical rounds, some of us sit in on the clinical rounds meetings that go on every week. When I do it, I talk just like I'm talking right now. First of all, I don't really know any clinical language. But second of all, I wouldn't use it if I did, I just find that our goal, again, is to humanize people. And some of these terms that seem so common for years, like frequent flyer, junkie. I used frequent flyer just a couple of years ago. I didn't think there was any harm in that, but I can see where there is now. Junkie, drunk, crazy, on and on. These are terms that I think just because they've been used for so long may seem harmless, but they're really not. And language is our biggest tool. Our biggest tool is our words. So we have to be very careful when talking amongst ourselves and in the notes, again, that, so we don't continue to do it around other people. And as I said, like in the notes, for me, for example, I'll use myself as an example of how I think a note should be written. And I see this in other notes as well. I remember that initial note, right, with the GI doc, and I had ETOH up at the banner. That got changed as well. There's a lot of other things that I can't stand in there, like bolded, AMA. We are very familiar with things like that in the notes. But with me, you could say something like Alan Reba is a 58-year-old male. He lives in Wakefield, Mass. He's happily married for 6 years. And he comes to see me today because whatever, you know what I mean? So I'm humanized. Whoever wrote that note humanized me before they wrote the rest of the note. So the next person reading the note may get that same human picture that I did. So with that, I'd like to say thank you very much, everybody, again. And I will pass the baton over to my friend Mike.
Thank you, everybody. My name's Mike, recovery coach from Mass General Brigham, but I am embedded as a recovery coach with Boston Healthcare for the Homeless Program Street Team. And we work with mostly those that are unsheltered out on the streets. Happy Recovery Month, and because it's Recovery Month, we wanted to mention this utterly failed concept of the war on drugs, which has led to drug laws and policies that have targeted marginalized communities. And out of those, Black communities, specifically Black men, have been hit the hardest. You think about mass incarceration, stop and frisk, the 3-strike rule, mandatory minimum sentencing. Even though Black people are more likely to sell or use drugs, they are more likely to be arrested and incarcerated. One of the studies that I was looking at looked at past month illicit drug use, and it's about the same for white and Black folks, about 10% across the board. However, drug-related arrests per 100,000 people for whites was 332, for Blacks was 879. Think about that picture for a minute. But just to compound this problem too, Once they are arrested and incarcerated, Black folks, the odds of diversion to drug treatment in the courts for Blacks were 53% lower than whites. In addition, prison sentences for drug-related offenses were around 13% longer for Blacks than whites. Talk about compounded structural and institutional racism. And that's something to think about there, something that we're doing wrong. So if we look at our efforts to address illicit drug use through the lens of racism, we can see there's a systemic problem, a structural problem that is deeply embedded from years of misguided policies that have targeted disadvantaged communities of color. And the law enforcement, always considered communities of color and marginalized communities low-hanging fruit. Next PowerPoint panel, please. However, you shift to the addiction landscape today. Nope, go back one. There you go. However, sorry about that. You shift to the addiction landscape today with the opioid epidemic. Once white suburban kids started overdosing, the perception of drug use went from one of criminalization to one of treatment focus. It seemed to be more compassion, more of a sympathetic concern. If you think about it, think about our medication-assisted treatment patient panels, or our outpatient addiction referrals, or addiction consults within a system for that matter. What are the racial makeups there? Are the numbers racially skewed? And I will tell you, over the past 6 years, there was one addiction treatment system that cared for over 7,000 patients. 80% were white, 7% were Black. In that same system, out of all the ER referrals to the addiction clinic, 78% were white. It's almost as if the people who have a different skin color, don't suffer from substance abuse. Why is it more likely that white people will have access to buprenorphine? Is it because it was marketed to whites? Or that methadone was viewed as a treatment that would not be acceptable to suburban middle-class people with opioid use disorder? I was speaking to one of my colleagues who works in one of the local jails. Medication-assisted treatment unit there, all white. Even as the incarceration rates are much higher among Black. It's pretty skewed if you ask me. Also, the flexible prescribing of buprenorphine still exponentially favors whites, even though fatal overdose rates continue to rise among Black people. And just to top that off, whites are 35 times as likely to have a buprenorphine visit than Black people. Next slide, please. I wanted to read this. The story of the opioid crisis is about intergenerational trauma and a healthcare system that remains unequal and ill-equipped to treat addiction. And to that, I would also add the addiction treatment system itself. Less access to effective pain control, as if Black people don't suffer from pain. They are more likely to be scrutinized in addiction treatment services and more likely to be monitored for noncompliance. I wanted to read this also. 92% of African Americans report being discriminated against, with nearly 89% in counseling identifying covert acts of racism as a contributing factor to race-based trauma. Now, I don't know about anybody else, but if that was me, I definitely wouldn't go back to that counseling center. And I'd think twice about getting addiction treatment anywhere if I was being treated like that. These are racially skewed treatment processes that the medical and the addiction treatment systems are partly responsible for, which means these are the same systems that can affect change. Think about this for a moment. Controlled medications are more likely to be prescribed to individuals living in majority white areas. It's ironic, but this may have somewhat shielded non-white communities from the brunt of prescription opioid epidemic, but it also points out to the disparity in treatment and access to medication. For those of us right now working in the addiction field, the first thing that comes to our mind should be this: what have we done wrong, and how are we going to fix it? Next slide, please. Policy outcomes and change, or the hope that change comes about. We should be implementing policies that have a mechanism that identify existing structural inequities, such as criminalization of drug use. What are the outcomes we are looking for, and how do we assure accountability? Here's an idea. How about focusing on people of color's lived experiences of receiving care in our facilities? And by understanding their experience of receiving care, it may be helpful in guiding interventions to improve outcomes. I'm not talking about patient experience surveys either. Look what that has got us today. I'm talking about interaction in those communities. Policies should be managed and rolled out. That includes the worldview, as my colleague was talking earlier, of Black and ethnically diverse communities. We must have equity at our treatment table, and existing power structures should not control the narrative of that. When we think about justice and racial equality, it's not enough to scream the words diversity and inclusion if we continue to duplicate the existing power structures. It's not enough to say, all right, we'll do better. That train, I believe, has passed. There has to be a deep structural change. I want to read a quote here from Tommy Obaro. She is the cultural writer for BuzzFeed, and I read an article of hers, and it was pretty profound. And she goes on to say, what about a justice that is more radical, more forward-looking, one that does not perpetuate existing power structures with a slightly browner tinge? Next slide, please. We have got to do a better job. Our efforts are failing in engaging Black and Latinx people in treatment. We are failing in continuity of care. We are failing in equitable distribution of treatment resources in our culturally diverse communities. So when it comes to fighting this addiction epidemic, it's not just a white fight with a slightly browner tinge, but a humanity fight. I hope myself that I can do a better job, and I hope my colleagues can do a better job. And hopefully this has given all of us some food for thought and inspires all of us to a call for action. I know we can do a better job. With that, I wanted to turn it back over to the moderators, and I thank you all for tuning in.
All right, thank you so much for that presentation. We do have time to showcase the video that you all wanted to share, so I will pull that up right now. 1 second, here we go. Let's go back.
Aidez-moi. 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 Aidez-moi.
When this woman in a New York waiting room collapses in 2008, hospital staff ignore her for an agonizing 45 minutes. When someone finally comes to her aid, it's too late.
Ça va? Essayez de me parler. Essayez de me parler, monsieur.
All right. So now we'll transition over to the Q&A portion. So if any of the participants have any questions, you can write it in the chat box. Let's see. Well, just as a comment, someone said this has been an amazing presentation. Thank you all for your insights, your honesty and bravery. And in terms of the video, someone said that it was extremely difficult to watch. And let's see. Here's a question. What are some ways we can work to increase the amount of people of color patients who feel comfortable coming to the bridge if most of our providers and patients are currently white? If they saw more people of color in the clinic, they might feel more welcome, but it's hard to get the ball rolling initially. So do any of you have any thoughts about that question?
So yeah, I think that's one of the big problems. Personally, I feel that we should be out into the communities of color recruiting folks in a different way than we do now. We do need more people of color. The demographic for our recovery coach folks is just almost all white. And I think we could see that throughout a lot of our treatment systems. But I think our recruiting has to become better. And I think we need to be out there embedded in the communities. We're not going to do that by sitting in the offices and, you know, staying in the brick and mortar buildings. We've got to get out into the communities that are suffering, and we've got to bring people in that understand their own culture.
All right, thank you for that answer. Does anyone else have any more questions to ask the panelists? Give it a few seconds to come in. All right, I think you guys did such an amazing job, that's why. But let's see. Thank you all for this amazing presentation. It can be so frustrating to get people into treatment these days due to the lack of treatment beds. Any thoughts on this and how individuals can continue to highlight this need?
My thought on that is I agree. It is extremely frustrating, the lack of treatment beds and their availability, as well as the bottleneck in the system where we have more detox beds than CSS beds and then fewer TSS beds. And it makes it increasingly difficult to work your way through the system if you choose to. As far as how individuals can continue to highlight the need, I think it's through conversations like this and speaking and just voicing that the problem exists, because the problem doesn't exist to people who are not struggling through the system. So to continue the conversations around topics like this and many others with people who aren't in the throes of the struggle is the only way that I know of to highlight the need, and the need for change specifically, if that's any help at all.
Yeah, I would just add that too, that I think the detoxes should go back to 30-day detoxes. You know, this 3 to 7 days and spitting people back out to the streets doesn't work, and there's just not enough beds. So the detoxes should be longer, so you could find safe places for people to go that might be out there. You can't do that in 3 to 7 days. It's ridiculous.
I would also add to that, me and Michael Jellison were talking about this a few years ago. Every hospital should have a detox floor, so that if somebody goes to the emergency room from an overdose, that is given to them as an option, so that they don't have to jump through a million hoops to get to a detox 50 miles away that may or may not have a bed.
That, and I think one of the big problems I find in that situation is the insurance companies. Flat out, it doesn't just start there. You know what I mean? I mean, strangely enough, we're one of the states that has some of the most beds in the whole country, which is really sad. But every stay is 3 to 5 days. You're absolutely right. If you have mass health, or most insurances, that you're just out of there, man. And you better hope there's something that comes up afterwards, a TSS or a CSS, which is hard to do, or else, that's just it. You're out the door. And if you don't have anywhere to go, they give you a list of shelters, and that's it. Make some phone calls. See you later. It's a whole bunch of things that come into play, it seems.
Yeah. And someone here had some feedback about welcoming more guidance / more examples on what not to say in our notes. They believe that they're cutting and pasting way too much. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, please, the notes are so important. So important. And I just found it out that one time that happened to me, the experience I showed you. But, again, so now I write every note like somebody else is reading it, right? So I want, not like I'm reading it, I want the next person that comes in to read my note and see how it's going to affect that person. And it's not like you have to stop with the clinical language in the notes. The clinical language has to be there a lot of the times. When doctors are talking amongst themselves, clinical language, right? When doctors are talking in the note, I can see where the clinical language needs to be there. Also, it's a shorthand part. But I think the goal is to try to humanize people as much as possible. And, I think you can, if you have that frame of mind going into it, then I don't think you really have to worry about what not to say. It'll just kind of come naturally.
And we have another question that says, is MGH moving towards in-hospital treatment with step-down programs after detox, if you guys know?
I know, we don't have a detox.
I think some people are hospitalized during their detox phase due to other issues, and they do a really good job that acts social workers on getting them sent to treatment after, like a step down unit, a CSS or a TSS, but sometimes the beds are not there and it's just not able to happen.
So any last few questions? I'll give you guys just another minute. Last minute questions. So if not, I think this is a good place to end. We'll end a few minutes early. Thank you all so much for your lovely presentation. Oh, we have one more question. What are some best practices to address colleagues who continue to stigmatize patients?
I would very calmly, a lot of people don't know they're doing it when it happens. Again, like, you know, up until just a couple of years ago, I still probably slip sometimes and use stigmatizing language. I do. You know, I just catch it now. But I mean, so a lot of people don't know. So this is where, you know, I would just kindly and kind of gentle bring the person to the side alone and try to make them aware of it in a kind and gentle way. You know, it's just the way it is. And so many people will just go, oh yeah, I didn't realize that, you know? Good idea. Pretty easy.
Also to remind people that it's a process. Recovery is a very long process. It doesn't happen overnight. I think sometimes people expect, you know, oh, if I recommend this or this, it's just going to magically, you know, fix the person. But that's just not the case. All of us here have struggled for years and years and years before, you know, we got to where we are now.
I think another thing that makes an impact sometimes with colleagues is if they're using language that, you know, is biased and it has a stigma attached to it. You know, one of the things that I can say to them is, hey, you're talking about me, because that's where I was. And it kind of gets them thinking like, whoa, you know, because that's that assumed thing, you know, and yeah, so.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I was going to say, I tend to leave my lived experience, and like Alan said, make sure it's a kind of private conversation. The last thing we'd ever want to do is call someone out in front of their peers and coworkers. But I really lived experience and just kindly explain how those negative connotations in the language that's used had a very negative effect on me during my years of active use. So it's a little different, I think, for a recovery coach to navigate that type of conversation, because we have that lived experience to talk about. So if you don't have that lived experience, to me, it would be engaging in an uncomfortable conversation, or a conversation that might seem uncomfortable at first, but just to talk about it and get it in the open, and at least have the person acknowledge or be made aware that the language can have a detrimental effect on the patient's care, I guess is the best way I can find to put it.
One of the easiest things to remember is always use first-person language. And don't attach labels to people, because we are more than our addiction.
All right. Thank you so much. That was a great place to end. Thank you to the attendees for joining, and thank you so much to our panelists for speaking. Hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
All right. Thank you, folks, very much.
Thank you, everyone.